Hello traders, welcome to the normal distribution section. Unfortunately, as you can see, I'm sure you've heard my dog in the background throughout the foundation course, and I'm sad to say that during the filming of actually this section, normal distribution section, she passed away. She had to be put down because due to ill health. I mean, you can see she was obviously quite an old girl. And I mentioned that a few times that, whilst in an ideal scenario, I didn't really want to obviously have a dog snoring in the background, but obviously she's been very old and not necessarily very poorly, but obviously deteriorating throughout the last few months. And so unfortunately it got to the stage where whilst I was filming this yesterday, her health had started to really go downhill. She was unable to urinate for about 24 hours, so I had to unfortunately take her to the vet, and they said, she's obviously developed certain issues, and it's beyond the point of being able to do anything for her. But the funny thing is, and I hope you don't mind me spending a few minutes saying this, because I'd actually put a bullet point on the next slide that had written dog, and it was a prompt, because what had happened is, because she was deteriorating quite a bit, I mean, it wasn't obvious at first, she was just getting very restless, and she was very, very noisy in the background. So obviously I put a note, because I didn't want to leave her outside, and I wasn't 100% certain what was going on. So I started the filming, and I'd actually written the bullet point there, but it got to the stage as I started filming it that it was obvious to me that she was in a lot of discomfort. So I took the decision to obviously take her to the vet, and that was it. So I thought, it would be quite fitting for me to dedicate. Initially I thought, let me dedicate this section of the course to her. Her name was Tiger, but and you can see she was obviously grey and getting very old, but she was quite fit and strong right to the very end. But coming back to the point about dedicating this section to her, and then I realised, actually, she's been one of the core reasons why I've been able to put this together. And I don't want to exaggerate that, and that may sound completely crazy, but it's not. Really, there's a bed behind me. She's kept me company throughout putting this whole thing together, and you can see it's been quite a long course, and I'd never realised just how much good it was to have that company, because now I'm trying to, initially yesterday I thought, what? I need to be professional and just carry on, but yesterday it just was like, I was almost at the point where I thought, what's the point? It felt very empty doing this, this section even. It was just a really weird feeling, silent feeling almost, and obviously whilst it wasn't ideal having her in the background sometimes scratching at the door, it was really yesterday when I realised how much actually it was great having all of that. It brought character to the course, it kept me, it just felt like I had someone around all the time, keeping me company whilst I was ploughing through doing all of this. But look, at the end of the day, I've now had one night to reflect on it, and I realised, do you know what? She was happiest when I was talking. And I realised this throughout the course, and forgive me, I won't take more than a couple of minutes to say this, but I realised, because any time, she was obviously making noise, I used to put her out. And when she heard me talking very enthusiastically in the course, like putting this course together, she would come to the door, and I think what it was is, I don't think she would have enjoyed me just moping around being silent. I think she really enjoyed hearing me talk and hearing that voice, because she felt that, my presence was here and I was doing something I was really passionate about and happy. I think she could really sense it, and that's no exaggeration. I really felt that's when she was happy, when she was sitting there. As you could tell, she was very peaceful and went to bed, as she made clear to us with her snoring. So I genuinely think she wouldn't have wanted me to really mope around for the next week and whatever. I think she would have wanted me to be happy. And this comes to my sort of final point, which is that dogs are very loyal and unselfish, the most incredibly unselfish creatures, I think. And man's best friend, all of that is very true. And I've realised as well that human beings, and no offence to anyone, but we can all, I think we'll all agree, human beings can be a little bit selfish in the sense that I realised that there's no point in me feeling sorry for myself. This isn't about me. This is more about her. And obviously yesterday's decision to let her go was really, it was about her, to make sure that she wasn't suffering anymore. And I realised she'll be much happier without just keeping her going, suffering, and being selfish like that. So rather than feel sorry for myself, I'm going to be positive and try my best to really recognise that it was in her best benefit. And, finally, just want to say, obviously you may be watching this a few years after I finish the filming of this, because obviously all the stuff in this course is, going to be relevant for many years after I put this together. But as it stands, obviously my career's been 16 years, and it's amazing for me to reflect and think that she's been here throughout the last 15 of those years. So really she's been with me through every relationship, the whole of my career. There were points when I was working obviously in an institution environment, and I used to work from around 6 in the morning, sometimes till 10 at night. So 16-hour days. It wasn't practical for me to have her with me all the time, so she'd have stints staying with my sister or my parents. But in particular the last few years, she's been literally sleeping behind me throughout all my trading and everything. And it's just I suppose there's two ways to look at it. Either it's a sad thing or it's a great thing that she gave me lots, and she contributed massively to this course. And obviously she's in a happy place now. So then rather than make it about me, I think it is really about her, and that, she's happier now. She's not suffering, and she's not in any discomfort. So really, thanks. I appreciate you letting me put this into this section. Obviously it was important for me. I wanted to say a few words and, dedicate really the whole thing, the Proem Foundation, to her. I don't think it would have been possible. I mean, obviously I would have done it, but I don't think I would have done it with as much vigour and enthusiasm. I realise that now, and I want to make sure I complete this with the same enthusiasm, in her memory. So, just want to celebrate her life really, and I appreciate you letting me put this in, and let's crack on and let's get some, real work done. And, I realise I'm a professional, I want to do the job properly. That's the right thing to do. So appreciate it. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, traders, let's get down to business. So, what's the purpose of this particular section? As we've said several times in all the previous sections, and we've been working towards, it's to find a way that we can measure value where the bulk of transactions fit in, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But what I thought would be very useful is for us to look at the transition that we've been through from the transition course right up until now, and remind ourselves of exactly how we ended up at this stage, which I introduced in the last section, balance imbalance, and I showed you how I scrunch up the volume profile. And what it is, I don't want people to, because going forward, basically, that's it. We're done with all of this. We're now going to be looking volume profile, and I'll introduce market profile, but we'll talk about that in a particular section. We're going to be looking at profile exactly like this, and I don't want people to A, treat that as an indicator, because it isn't, and B, I want people to not think, oh, it's something new, and get worried. And if you've done all the depth of market stuff I've asked you to do, you should basically just be should feel very natural to be looking at this, because it's what you've been looking at for 3 months, and that's the point. So that's what I wanted to just sort of show, that transition, just in case there was any confusion. So let's start. Banana market, we had a look at in the foundation example, right? And we said that essentially banana market was having transactions taking place around a sort of central value, and every time, do you remember, the market got overextended, people got trapped and we came back, and when it went overextended to the downside, again, people got trapped in the sense that they had oversold, got too excited, and obviously some of those positions had to be unwound. And where did we come back to? We came back to fair value. And we didn't talk about it in the level of detail that I've talked about in the Pro course, but I hope you can see now, in hindsight, looking back at it, that essentially we were just coming back to some sort of central value, and that's really important. We're going to talk about this sort of central tendency that markets have, and I'm going to show you how that's actually quite useful for us to find probability distribution, one particular type of probability distribution that fits that very well. But don't worry, it's not going to get very mathematical, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. But again, I just wanted to remind you what all we did in the foundation section was we looked at market orders in the banana market, actual physical aggression taking place, and that was the volume profile. So look, I don't want to obviously go into it unnecessarily. It should be pretty obvious to you what happened there. And then I transitioned you over onto the depth of market, and we had market orders taking place, this time purely on a financial market. But as you saw, it was the same thing, right? All that was happening is market orders were taking place at particular price levels. Just to squeeze everything in, I obviously don't have all four columns, but you're going to be familiar with bids, market orders, and then the supply side offers, which I'm not showing all of that here. But as you know, market orders, every time a market order took place at a price level, it got recorded as a transaction. No different to what was going on in the banana market. And you started off on treasuries, and if you had a chance, you may have seen that exact same thing is happening on S&P 500, pound dollar, euro dollar. And then all I did is I squeezed the profile, didn't I? So it is exactly this, or even this, is this, isn't it? And it was squeezed, as I showed you in the balance imbalance section. And obviously what we're trying to do now is just find some sort of area where we can say, do you know what, the majority of transactions took place here, because you can see it yourself, there's too many transactions taking place here for us to realistically, as I've been through really to death, in great detail, although obviously if anyone doesn't get it, I'm happy for them to reach out to me, but the majority, you should have realized by now that what I was saying about the webcam example and businesses having the opportunity to be very precise with price over a day, 2 days, 1 week, because of this stickiness, just doesn't exist in financial markets. I mean, you can see how many transactions are taking place. Thousands upon thousands of transactions are taking place at so many different price points. It's difficult for us to be precise. So we're trying to almost equate that one price into just be a bit more fluid and give it some sort of leeway and say, you know what, roughly price transacted within this area. Now, I don't know if some of you have noticed this, those of you that were quite eagle-eyed, and even if you haven't, it's okay. That's the whole point why I wanted to do this slide quickly, is if you noticed when I was trading, especially some of the more thinner markets, if you saw I was trading the depth of market of pound dollar in the example, I believe somewhere towards the end of module 4, and you saw me trading the pound dollar, and you may have noticed this yourself as well. Have you noticed how on US treasuries there tends to be quite a balanced profile, and that's obviously to do with liquidity, and there's plenty of liquidity going around, so it's very easy for the market to, relatively speaking, easy for the market to do what? Go through this process of finding fair value, because there's so many participants, it has plenty of transactions to sort of find its way towards where fair value is going to be. But as you notice, the more illiquid it gets, you may have noticed this, that there was, there were little pockets of value, weren't there? Because the profile was that much more spread out. And, that kind of makes sense. Euro dollar here, you can see it's very thin, but you've almost got several profiles. There is a point why I'm mentioning this. Even the S&P here, you see, there's a little tiny bit of balancing going on in that pocket. There's some balancing going on here. There's a little bit here. There's some here. And you noticed, do you remember I was taking trades, almost keying off, sort of if the market got aggressive through here, came back, then I'd be going that way, or if it sort of failed to really get up there and then came back, I'd be keying off that level and bringing it back into this value, using this value, or you could potentially use this value to sort of key off and bring it back. There are all these little pockets of value. And can you see that essentially, you may not have noticed this, but this is one of the reasons that I scrunched it up, as I got on in my career, because I recognized that all that was happening, if you look at what I pointed out here, like this little value here, this little value here, which is what I was doing in that pound example in particular, and then there's a little bit here. Look, it's exactly the same here. Can you see it? There's a little bit there. There's that little bit there. There's a little bit here. This is what you're doing on the depth of market. And then there's not much volume here, so the price would go straight through because there's not many people to obviously transact or interest. Go straight through, and then it will obviously settle in this area. Then you've got a little bit here, and so on and so forth. And the problem is, when you're stuck on such a small or microscopic basis, can you see? You can have value everywhere. You can have value here, you can have value here, you can have value here, you can have value here. By scrunching it up, what is it allowing us to do? This same process, but look. Overall, that's all I'm doing. It's just allowing me to look at value over the whole day and where fair value is for the whole day rather than just for an hour or 2 hours at a time. So I'm really taking a bird's eye view, but the point is that I'm doing it on the same market. So rather than looking at these little pockets, I've just decided that rather than, just to reiterate the point, rather than looking that the same way I was looking at, in the treasury market, little pockets of value here, what I'm actually doing is I'm saying, do you know what? Rather than being so focused on microscopic values, I'm going to actually look at value like that. And what that allows me to do is obviously get a better sort of sense where the market is, what the market's trying to achieve over the whole day, over the whole week, over 2-3 days, over a month. And we're going to talk a lot more about this when we actually get to building trading strategy, because you're going to see that different investors have different time horizons. Yeah, it's all well and good being a trader on the depth of market, but that's really just looking at where short-term institutional traders are looking, algorithms are trading. It's not looking at where obviously more of the medium-term traders are looking, and we're going to get into that. I'm hesitant to mention, all the names of things like different types of hedge fund strategies that institutions are employing, or real money funds, pension funds, some of the more longer-term time frame investors. And we'll look at that. But obviously to do that, you have to start to look at fair value over longer periods of time. And that doesn't mean we're not using the depth of market. All it means is we're just not being so microscopic about it. We're actually getting off the depth of market, but scrunching it up. So in a way, we're really staying on it, but we're just looking at it from much more of a bird's eye perspective. So I just wanted to make that clear, because going forward, I'm only going to be looking at profile from sort of this level upwards. I'm no longer going to be looking at microscopic profile, which is what you've been so used to doing now for 2-3 months. And what it is because I'm making the transition there, I just wanted to make sure that you understood, look, we're not really changing anything. All we're doing is we're just, rather than drilling down, we're doing the opposite. We're basically now looking at a much more bigger perspective. So we can, and I know I've said it already once, but I just want to reiterate it because it is important. We're not, if you think about it, when you're watching the depth of market, you're really seeing what's price trying to achieve from, almost, say, if it's out of balance, back into balance. You're talking about really a few ticks, as you saw with the treasury market. Well, if that was this balance area and we were, trying to get out and unable to because we saw absorption and aggression coming back in, what's the market trying to achieve? Well, it's just moving a few ticks back in. We're doing the same process now, but we're doing it over the entire market. And that's going to allow us to transition onto charts and really understanding what is the whole investment community as a whole trying to achieve. We can't do that on a depth of market. I hope that's clear to you and why it's really important that you now shift your perspective and we start to look at volume profile from a much sort of bigger perspective. And we still recognize and respect that all of this is going on, but rather than our pure focus being on this, we now, how you saw me do the triangle, this essentially forms the 5%. The order flow, the fine tuning, the sort of microscopic detail, as I've said several times. So that doesn't mean it's not important, because at the end of the day, we've said it before, but if you want to think of a real world example, if you think of Tesco, at the end of the month, they might say, do you know what? We sold 1 million loaves of bread. But at the end of the day, it still matters that individual people, like we're seeing individual transaction here, how did that million get formed? There were individual people going to individual stores doing individual transactions. Now imagine someone never told you about that. You can't just take this big number, 1 million at the end of the month and just work with it, because you wouldn't know how was that million actually built up. That's why I had to get you on the depth of market. I hope you can see, because if I just said to you, this is a volume profile, just believe me guys, this is market orders, not going to make sense to you unless you'd actually seen it. Can you see how powerful it is to have actually spent time on the depth of market? Because now you're going to understand this. You're going to see this building throughout the day. You're just going to get it. You're going to know, I see what people are doing. They're basically, when they're here, they're either going in balanced, or if they fail and they come back in, I get it now, they're going back into balance. You've seen it on the depth of market from a microscopic perspective. It's exactly the same thing, but obviously this is going to allow us not have to sit there, stare at these numbers up and down all day. And also, do you know what? One thing I haven't mentioned, absolutely crucial, and you may have picked up on it. You've got to remember, guys, that, and this is something that I never really fully appreciated until obviously I became a much better trader. And this was, it's natural. Obviously, throughout time, you pick things up and you get better as time goes on. And one thing that did occur to me is that, look, if you think about it, even if there's some guy who's got some flow, he's got some orders to fill because he's got an investment horizon of 3 days, 1 week, whatever it is, at the end of the day, isn't that going to have an impact on the market, even from a short-term perspective? Of course it is. Let's say you're sitting here, you're staring at your depth of market, the price is, you're looking at this little pocket of value and the price is somewhere in this region, and you see huge absorption coming in and you see aggression coming in. What if you could know that actually, hang on a minute, there's, this bigger sort of value, there's some guy who's actually likely to come in at this area because he's got a big order to fill, because he's taking a position for a longer perspective. Can you see? That's going to impact this area. If you're solely focused on just looking at what's going on here, you're not going to see what the guys are doing up above you, and that type of order flow is significant, and it can move the market significantly more than obviously a small algo playing a few ticks. So that's the reason I'm going to move us away from that and really get us to start looking at value from obviously a bigger perspective. And just finally to say that, to reiterate, obviously we need to define what that value is. So that's what we're going to move on to the next slide. And we're just going to look at value from, profile from this perspective and larger now. So don't get, like I said, too confused. You shouldn't be. You should really just understand that it's just what we've been doing all along, but obviously we've just scrunched it up so we can start to figure out what the market's trying to achieve over the whole day and a bit further. So we can start holding positions, and we can be a bit more relaxed and have a bit more of a feel for what the whole market's trying to achieve. So let's go on to the next slide. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so what we're doing on this slide is I don't really get too worried about all these mathematical formula you see here. I will discuss them, but in no way are we going to, I'm not expecting you to know what any of this is. In fact, the opposite, and I'll come on to that in a moment. What I want to do is I think it'll be quite useful for us to do a very quick recap of what we were looking at in the prior section, which is that, if you remember, this was essentially the volume profile for the day in the E-mini S&P, and these were just profiles obviously of prior days. So you can imagine why I'm doing this again, because if I was on that little depth of market that you see with all the tiny incremental values, how on earth am I going to know what investors are trying to achieve over a few days? It's impossible, right? This is where you're really going to take your trading to the next level, because you're going to have a brilliant understanding now of what investors on all different time horizons are going to do, and we're going to build that up for you. But firstly, we need to measure this thing we've been talking about for a while now, about value areas. So you can see it here. Typically, it's kind of obvious when you eyeball it that the majority of transactions took place in these little buckets almost. And we need to define those buckets, because at the end of the day, we want to be able to compare them day to day. So I'm going to show you how institutions are doing that. They're just saying, look, do you know what? That's where value is. And this is called actually a value area high and a value area low. And I'm going to talk about that quite a bit. Value area high, value area low. And institutions are using these areas to determine whether the market is balanced, or if it breaks out and it goes up, it's imbalanced, and then you're getting into the next area of balance. And we've talked about this quite a lot, what imbalance means, in that obviously it's aggression, more aggression on one side of market orders, more buyers than sellers, but in aggressive terms, not outright terms, as we've said many times. Because buyers and sellers are always going to be equal. It's the aggression, the market orders coming in, and obviously there could be some fundamental reasons behind it. But as I said, in my opinion, that's all sort of factored in already. But the point is this, that we are going to find this to measure a measurement for how we can define these levels. But also, I just wanted to make one point as well. And I know I always apologize. I don't know why I'm apologizing. I shouldn't. It's not my fault that, the Forex industry has created all this garbage around, retail terms like trending. And the reason I said trending is because, have you noticed, guys, the market never trends. It doesn't actually trend. There's no such thing as trending. All the market is doing is imbalancing, trying to seek what? Value. What is the marketplace? It's trying to match buyers and sellers. At this stage, aggressive buyers and sellers, at this stage, there's no sort of match, is there? Where aggressive buying is being countered by aggressive selling, i.e. sellers are aggressively happy. If a seller is aggressive, he's more happy than someone who's passive, right? That means he's very happy to sell. A balanced market, as you know, will have aggressive buyers and sellers. How do we know that? Market orders. What happens in this space if market orders are taking place in both ways? Profile builds heavily, doesn't it? What happens in imbalanced areas where there aren't aggressive buyers and sellers? There's nothing. It's very thin. There's no transactions taking place. It's all aggressive buying, and there's no aggressive selling to meet it. So that's what happens when people see, basically all the market's doing is, as I've showed you many times, is happy, transacting, whatever, and then boom, it goes up, imbalances. People call this trending. It's not. Okay? It's seeking value. It's looking for areas where can I find transactions to take place? Okay, really crucial you understand that the market never trends. It's just constantly seeking value, seeking areas of value. And your job as a trader, I'm going to talk about this a lot later, is to find out where do people in different investment horizons and classes perceive value to be, and it is a very, very hard job to do. I'm not going to lie to you, but obviously with the correct tools, at least you can have a good chance of being able to do that. And we're going to talk a lot more about that. And look, I know I've gone a little bit off topic here, but it's really important because I'm trying to lay some seeds in your mind. I don't want to just throw this at you all of a sudden, a few sections time, and you're like, whoa, that's a lot for me to take in. What I'm trying to do is subtly lay these seeds in your mind, so you're already starting to think about them. And what will happen is you'll see, at the end of the day, what you probably haven't realized, you may have you noticed how this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 trading sessions, say about a week, right? Just over a week. This is actually a depth of market, but broken out. So in theory, think about it. You could have, and Sierra Chart and all institutional platforms let you do this. I don't necessarily do it on 5-day or a 6-day basis. I do look at it for a week, but we'll get into that. I just don't want to confuse you right now. Is that what you could in theory do is you could join. If you think about it, if you move this profile right to the edge of the screen, you move this one in, you move that one in, you move that one in, you move that one in, what would happen? You'd have that and that's kind of merged up here, wouldn't you? So you'd have a bit of a bulge there. Then there's not much volume here, so it'd be thin. Then you merge these two together, a bit of this and a bit of that, and you'd have a big bulge here because you'd have all this volume, right? Then you'd have very little volume in this space, this space, this space, so it goes in again. Then you'd have a bulge again because what? You'd moved this area into here. Okay, and then you'd have a very thin profile because there's no volume here. So can you see? That is a volume profile, but all you've done is you've just broken it out into little pieces. Can you see that? It's almost like, let me see here. I think this should work. Yeah, can you see? It's almost similar to, obviously this is actually a day period, but imagine that was a whole week. All you've done is you've just said, all right, do you know what? I'm going to break that out. I'm going to take that out. I'm going to break that out. I'm taking this. I'm going to break that out. Okay? That is basically what you've got here, is you've got a depth of market on your page for a whole week. It's just broken out. Can you see the type of analysis you can do with this? Is amazing. Honestly, I'm really, it still excites me to this day. I mean, obviously, as I said, I was a depth of market trader, and I didn't really start looking at profile until a little bit later on into my career, which was around that sort of 6 to 8 year period, which I've mentioned in the reality check video, I believe. So, I've been obviously in the business 16 years. So it's only been about 8 years, 8 to 10 years, a little under 10, about 8 years that I've been looking at this type of analysis, really getting off the depth of market and looking at this. And it still excites me to this day how amazing it is, the sort of things you can work out about what investors are trying to achieve by really breaking profiles out over longer periods of time and understanding and seeing, actually, do you know what? Everything that was going on in my depth of market, it's actually happening here. It's happening here. I mean, if I hadn't told you that this was Friday, this was Monday, this was Tuesday, this was Wednesday, and this was Thursday, for all you know, this is a day profile. For all you know, that could have been an hour out of this day profile. This could have been another hour. This could have been an hour. This could have been an hour here. This could have been an hour, a few hours, or whatever. This could have been a few hours that made up this entire, chunks out here. That just made up this day. And that's your day broken out, right? How do you know that it's a week? It's only because you can see it here. Can you see that? You can really start to do amazing things if you broaden your horizons and just apply the same analysis you've been doing on the depth of market, but rather than being so microscopic and looking at the minutiae, start to really understand that, you know what? People are trying to achieve fair value over longer periods of time. And as you know, it's a little bit, this is the final point I'm going to make here before we actually define this this area that we want to call fair value, is this is what's actually unique. And again, I'm just laying the seed. Don't think I'm talking for the sake of it. I apologize that this has gone on a little while, but it's important I mention this. The difficulty is, and I've noticed a lot of people do find this hard to accept. I think they get it, but they don't want to accept it, is that generally in a consumer market like bread, milk, chocolate, eggs, whatever you have. Would you agree? People are buying bread or buying eggs or buying milk. They're not looking to sell that in a year's time or in 6 months' time or in 1 month's time. So one is purchase and then you consume it as consumers. The problem in financial markets is the beauty of it, but the problem from a speculative perspective is that, think about it, when you buy the pound or you buy the stock market index or when you buy a commodity as a speculator, does every single person view it the way that they view bread? Everyone buys bread and they eat it. It's done. That's it. Why do you think it's so easy for bread price to kind of be sticky? It's about £1. Everyone will kind of agree on it, the whole world, or at least your general local market, like your country or whatever. It doesn't work like that in financial markets, does it? That's the problem. There's different people, some people called locals, which we're going to talk about, who are proprietary trading firms, short-term algorithms. They're not interested in holding this thing for a week. But then you'll have medium-term investors, certain types of hedge fund styles that obviously want to do what? Take risk, intra-week risk. They want to take it for a week, right? I mean, if you've got an algorithm that's trading on the depth of market, it's interested in a few ticks. Who on earth is going to hold the market for a week for a few ticks? Obviously, they're looking for bigger moves. Then you've got pension funds who are holding for months, right? You've got central banks, you've got obviously different types of institutions that are looking to play longer term. They might be looking for 500 ticks. Can you see? Their perception of value is going to be very different. Again, I know I'm going off topic here, but I hope you can understand. It's important you start to think about this, because I am going to introduce it slower. So, we talked about this before being potentially the profile for the whole week. If we were to merge all of these together and scrunch them up into this side, do you see? Someone with a longer term perspective for a week, his perception of value might be this whole area. And the market might be down here and he might be thinking, do you know what? I'm seeing aggression, I'm seeing absorption, or whatever it is he's seeing some supportive fundamental factors, and he's thinking, do you know what? I think there's a good chance we're going to get back into fair value for the whole week, and therefore I'm going to play this to get back into that area, right? Very different to a algorithm who's looking at that area there, as you saw me do on the pound dollar. But in theory, it's the same thing. It's just over a wider horizon. But see, this is the difficulty in financial markets, is this order flow is going to impact that order flow, and then there might be some medium-term guy over here who's looking at these two buckets of value, and the market's, obviously it's not, it's over here at the time, but, something's happening over here which makes him think it's going to be imbalanced or whatever. Now, obviously this doesn't align, but you understand my point. This order flow is going to impact this order flow, is going to impact this. These order flows are all impact each other, and I'm going to show you how to navigate this. But this is the beauty of profile and starting to look at it from a bird's eye perspective. So I've realized I've basically completely gone off topic there, but it was important I did that, because I want you to understand why we've moved away. Because what I've noticed is, especially feedback from the foundation courses, a lot of people, and look, it's a good thing. I really love the enthusiasm, but you've got to be careful that you don't become obsessed with the depth of market and becoming profitable on there. Because I'm going to show you why. You're not going to do it. The way the algorithms are these days, and I'm going to show you actually some institutional guys trading on a depth of market later as well, because I want to show you other institutional guys as well, not only me. It's quite nice for me to show you other guys, and I'm going to show you how algorithms have really changed now, and it's very, very difficult. This, on the other hand, is something where human beings can really add edge, because it's very difficult to trade an algorithm on this type of analysis, where we can actually start to look at value here. We can look at obviously what locals are doing. We can also look at the intraday value there. We can look at value over 2-3 days, that type of investor. as I said, we can look at the bigger term. We can start to put all these things together and really use our discretion. And as I said, you get paid to really think outside the box, and that's what we can do. So anyway, I hope you can see that that was actually done for a logical reason, that I wanted to go through that. And what we're going to do now is we're actually going to look at how value is measured. So let's look at it from a sort of probability distribution perspective. So I'm just going to talk you through this slide. So we've done the recap and a little bit more. I went on a little bit of a tangent, but it was very relative. Like I said, I want you to start becoming comfortable with this type of profile, no longer obviously being so focused on the minutiae. Obviously the dog thing I discussed with you and told you why there was a bullet point there. So really I want to start to talk a little bit about this probability distribution. So as I said, this is no longer relevant to us. We've now transitioned into profile on a sort of wider basis, and what essentially I've done is, so we've got the profile going from top to bottom, right? But all I've done is I've just flipped it, okay? So again, don't think I was doing something different. I'm not. The reason I flipped it is because of this. So what this is called a bell curve distribution. And firstly, I want to be quite clear and tell you that I've mentioned to you, when you go into a professional firm, what I actually said to you at the start was that I would be very clear when you go into a professional firm, what they're going to teach you and what they're not. This, they're not going to teach you. I can be absolutely say that with 100% certainty. They don't teach you about normal distribution. They expect you to know it, not to any level of detail, and I think it's a mistake. And I'll show you why, because I think it's actually quite useful for you to know, because I've seen it time and time again. People just use this stuff as almost indicator-like, and it's not that. You've got to understand the limitations. You've got to understand the measurements that, so this sort of area of value, right, the balance area that we define, you need to know how that's formed to some extent. I don't want you to just take my word for it. At the end of the day, probably makes more sense what I'm trying to get at if we answer this question. Is maths important? Because I know there's going to be some of you who have never heard of a normal distribution, and maybe you know very little about statistical mathematics. And I've got good news for you. You're at an advantage, and you won't even believe me. I know you'll be thinking, nah, you're just having us on. You're just saying that to make us feel better. And actually, I don't need to do that. You've already bought the course. You haven't asked me this question before purchasing the course, like, Envy, do I need to know maths? And I'm just telling you this so you buy. No. I'm a very honest person, as you know. I'm very blunt. I tell it how it is. And, so there's no reason for me to mislead you. I'm telling you, frankly, very genuinely, that you have a major advantage if you've done very little maths before. And that's going to be music to your ears, and that's good. Now, I've put here, is maths important? It depends. Now, what it is I said I'm going to be honest with you. I've noticed in social media circles, there seems to be, it's irresponsible anyway. You shouldn't be trading things like gold, and because it's a very thin profile, and, I'm going to get into that later. And foreign exchange is obviously one of those markets as well. I'm sorry to say, but no professional firm is going to let you trade those markets, because they understand how thin the volume is, and how difficult it is for the market to, how I said before, in treasuries, you've noticed it. The profile builds very nicely. Why? Because it's very liquid. There's people there. There's a lot of volume. The process, as I said before, of price determination is happening very quickly, because buyers and sellers are in abundance. FX, just not the case, guys. It's a grey market. You have to understand that. It's thin. Why do you think in pound dollar, I was struggling? Do you remember? I was like, there's a bit of value here, there's a bit of value here, there's a bit of value here, and a bit of value here. In treasury, it's like gollops all that up, and it's just nice and smooth. It's all over the place in FX, right? So that's one thing, but that's not the point. Point, coming back to mathematics, is that I've noticed people are very irresponsible. they'll be pushing options towards you. I've noticed this big trend of people wanting to get into options. Complete and utter bonkers, absolute bonkers. At the end of the day, you've got to realise the value of an option is driven by time decay, by volatility. To measure these things, people may not want to accept this. But yeah, you need to understand what on earth is going on in the mathematics of all of that, because you may not know this, and this isn't for my ego boost, but it's because I want to bring things to life and tell you that I actually experienced this myself. So at the start of my career, I had a little stint on the options desk. I worked on an options desk, and I used to build incredibly complex pricing models on spreadsheets and using quite complicated mathematics. So there was a time when I could read what you see here. It was like English to me. It was very straightforward because this is what I studied. I was a mathematician at business school, and I built quite heavy financial models, which is probably why I got into investment banking fairly easily. But you might be thinking, oh, who does he think he is? But it's not that. Actually, the reason I'm telling you all this, because it's worked to my disadvantage massively. Because for options, structured products, I'm going to tell you bluntly, if you don't know, decent level of maths and statistics, forget it. You shouldn't be touching those markets. But guys, these are vanilla products. These are not driven by all these different variables like I talked about: time, decay, volatility, even volatility of volatility. You need to understand quite a lot of things to trade options in a certain way. It's very important you understand that. But markets, like the spot market, futures market, no, they're called vanilla markets. They're driven by what? Transactions, human beings. It's a very emotional field. It's, maths is not involved at all. And in fact, to make my point, because it's an important point, let's be honest, to put people at ease, they need to know this up front. Hang on, what am I getting myself into? Should I go and learn all this stuff? No, and I'm going to show you why. What are we trying to do, right? We're trying to say that, okay, let's try and find out where balance is in this market based on transactions that have taken place throughout the day. Guys, we got to realise is that the market's very imperfect. So what could have happened here on this particular day? No 2 days are exactly the same. This market could have done this. Do you see it could have gone like that, it could have gone like that, and then it could have gone like that, and then it could have had these sort of emotional spikes all over the place. So do you see these, even when you're using maths to define these values, in certain instruments, like I said, more illiquid instruments where you've got more sophisticated players and it's purely institutional, which is typically tends to be the case in things like structured products and options and so on and so forth. It isn't such a broad market. So some of those mathematical factors are much more important. But here, guys, honestly, I can tell you, whether you mark your value area high here or whether you mark it here, I can honestly, and I don't like to use these type of phrases, but it's true, the market doesn't give a monkeys. I can tell you without any hesitation that anywhere in this region is going to be okay. I tell you from experience, having been a maths junkie myself, I used to find it so difficult to accept that the mathematical answer is this line, but oh no, actually the market did what? Can you see? It decided to turn around a little bit above where I thought my exact line should be. So let me just, again, it is important I do this for especially those of us that are kind of a bit concerned about what I've been showing in terms of mathematics. So what it is, so in a balanced market, right, guys, sometimes the market's going to turn around here, okay, and it's going to go up. Sometimes it's going to do this, and then it's going to go up, back into balance. Sometimes it's going to go a little bit further and go. Can you see? It could be anywhere in this region. Okay. But then why do we use a model? Because at the end of the day, I don't want to be drawing it over here. Okay, that's just ludicrous. I don't want to be drawing it right at the edge. That's just ridiculous. don't want to be drawing it over here. You know, I want to get some sort of semblance of standardized value that I can use to just compare across. And essentially, that by looking at a probability distribution, and it'll make sense in a second, we can get a very approximate idea. And like I said, the guys who have never heard of a normal distribution before, guys, I assure you, you're going to be at a massive advantage. So please don't go out and, go and spend the next year of your life trying to learn maths. You're wasting your time. You're going to go backwards because you're going to make the mistake. And I suffered big time. I told you I had this 2-year period where I was a bit stagnant, and I know I've mentioned other reasons, but you've got to, I've said it before, financial market is vast and there's a plethora of reasons. And actually this was another major reason. Do you remember I told you that I found it difficult to allow the market this sort of leeway to be very fluid, and precision kills people? I saw it so many times. Financial whiz kids coming in thinking they could trade the S&P 500 or, like me, they'd come from a technical background. They got crushed. Why is that? Because they just couldn't accept it. If the market had a little bit of a, bad moment and then came back in, they would say, nope, that is imbalanced. I know, because my mathematical formula tells me it has to be here. Okay? Problem is, the market doesn't give a monkey's. Like I said, it's not perfect. I'm going to show you that in a moment. It could just as easily be that fair value's in this region. And so I kind of learn to, you know what? Let me read the volume in the moment dynamically. And this is where I'm going to give a reality check later. Then, people find this very hard to accept, that there is no magic tool or indicator. And this, in a nutshell, is why. Because the market's very imperfect. It's not going to be precise. You have to be very good at recognizing the market's doing this. And that's why I had you on the depth of market, obviously to build up some sort of understanding of absorption and things like that. I'll show you how you can start to read some of that without looking at the depth of market. Cumulative delta, there'll be certain tools we can use, footprint to an extent, and as well. But there'll be ways, we can help to kind of identify that potentially is not actually going to go imbalanced. It's actually, even though it's broken out of this sort of area that we call value area, lower value area high, actually it's kind of just faked. Not faked, but it's just overshot slightly. And obviously these are things you have to learn to read in the moment. And the problem is, if you have this mathematical mindset that everything has to be precise, you're finished. I'll tell you right now, you're going to have big problems, because I can assure you the market will not stop at that exact line that we're about to define using a probability distribution model. It's going to be imprecise. So, that's why I say, hope it's clear. If you kind of just get the gist of it, massive advantage, because you're not going to approach it in that precise sense. And I know I keep saying it, because obviously I hope you appreciate I don't have instant feedback, and I just want to make sure everyone gets it. That's why sometimes I do repeat myself a few times. But in a nutshell, basically, as long as you come away from this knowing that, 70% of values constitutes the majority, it's as simple as that. You'll be okay. And then I'm just going to basically show you some basic stuff like the mean, the mode, which is literally just, and you see it in green here, it's just the area where the highest number of transactions took place. And the mean, everyone knows what the average is. And if you can just accept that, when the bulk of transactions, the sort of bracket where the bulk, 70% of the bulk of transactions fit in, is my value area, i.e. 70% of transactions is this many. These are market orders, right? Just scrunched up. 70% fit in here, that's my value area. But I've got to do this section, because at the end of the day, if I just tell you that, I don't want you to just say, do you know what? Envy told me it was 70%, so I'm going to use... No. We don't do that. I've always said to you, anytime someone told me something, even my boss, no, I don't accept it. You've got to have, at least to some extent, you've got to understand, why is it 70%? But at the end of it, my point is, going forward, as long as you kind of just say, do you know what, 70%, yeah, I'm okay with that, you're going to be at a massive advantage to the other person who says, no, it's got to be this particular level because the probability distribution says it has to be 68.8%. No, you're going to be in big trouble doing that. So let's get on and actually look at normal distributions, which is the type of probability distribution, and then we can sort of get you to see why I talked about this 70%. Okay, so this is the final bit I just want to say on this slide before we look at a real example, is that, so this is something called a normal distribution, okay, and it's very, very, very simple. Please don't look at this and think, oh my god, I'm never going to get this, all these percentages. Some of you will be familiar with this. You'll know about standard deviations, 1, 2 standard deviations, from obviously the sort of mode, or the mean, which in a normal distribution they're equal, obviously. But if that makes no sense to you, I'm going to go over that in a moment. What it is the reason that we use normal distributions is because we're going to go over this in the next slide, but just notice one thing, that markets in a balanced environment behave exactly like a statistical normal distribution. And I know you're sitting there thinking, what on earth is a statistical normal distribution? Not all of you, but those of you who are not familiar with it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go on the next slide, and we're going to discuss it. And this, don't worry about it too much. All this is it's just showing us why in this type of environment, which is actually applicable to many scenarios in real life, doctors are using normal distributions for clinical trials. Governments are using them to forecast certain characteristics about the population, because obviously they can't ask every single person a question if they want to find out certain characteristics about the population that live in the country, and so on and so forth. So they use samples, and then they will try to figure out, what's the likelihood that certain percentage fits into a range. And that's essentially all we're trying to do, is we're trying to find out what range does the majority, i.e. this 70% I talk about, fit into some sort of range. So what we're going to do next is, and I'm going to come back to this, is essentially we're going to talk a little bit about the normal distribution and what is a normal distribution. And in fact, why don't I just quickly kick that off here, and then we can go to the next slide, because it's quite I'm thinking, do you know what? I don't want anyone to be left at the end of this slide with any sort of feeling of dread in their mind that, I'm never going to get this. If you think of, you've actually looked at a normal distribution if you've done the foundation and followed some of the modules without probably realizing it. Do you remember we had the example where I said that we were looking at milk, and we had the milk price at 150, wasn't it? We had it at 150, and do you remember I said to you that, if you go, and take a survey outside of the high street, and everyone coming up to you gives you a price, well, that it's almost like doing a tally. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 at a price. That's all you were doing, guys. That is exactly what a normal distribution is. It's basically sorting data into something called a histogram, which is that if you've got your $1.50 for milk, and I said to you what, every time someone buys, so this is just quantity here, and every time someone buys at 150, just record it like that. What would you do? You'd be recording, because everyone's going to be buying at this kind of central price, very close to 150, right? You're not going to have someone buying it at 0 or 10p or 20p, unless they're very lucky and they get like some sort of bargain. You're going to get the odd person. But the closer you get to the sort of general price of milk, the more transactions are going to take place, and you're going to be recording these by hand, right? All the normal distribution is doing is it's taking a line of best fit and saying, that's it. Do you see that? Look, can you see the shape? Okay, so I thought, you know what, let me just show you that quickly. So you see, very simple. It's just literally a record of data, a tally at every single price point. And I want you to recognize this. What is going on? And you know the reason I showed you this as well is because I realized it's probably quite good for me to show you this whilst I've got the old depth of market here, because you can't see that level of detail here and you wouldn't be able to see this. Look, instead of 150, what is it? It's just a price. And what's that? Quantity. It's exactly the same thing. Can you see the market's doing that? Right? At every price, you're just recording, and instead of you recording on a piece of paper, the exchange is doing it for you. The exchange is saying, oh, one contract at 3, that could be 150, right? And one transaction of milk took place. So it'll just be one contract, market order. Instead, it's just the financial market price. Just the price at the end of the day. Same thing's happening, and we're looking at a best fit. And it just so happens, and I'm going to explain this later on, that so you agree this depth of market is that, and it's just that flipped over. That the behavior of financial markets in a balanced environment is what majority of transactions take place in the center. In the center. Milk, what does it do? Bread, all these products. They don't fluctuate in the sense that they may, but at the sort of more extreme levels, these areas, very little transactions take place, and in the meat, the middle, the main price, lots of transactions take place. So what mathematicians have realized is that, you know, things that have a sort of tendency to have this sort of central value, which is so many things, as you know, pretty much every product you see on the supermarket shelf is approximately the same price all over the country, right? Okay, 5p, 10p here and there. But what's the financial market doing? Is it, when a financial market is moving time and price, does it do that? No, of course not. It gyrates a little bit. 5p, 10p here and there, in the same way a price of the good does, the market's doing that as well. It's exactly the same. So that's why, you know, you might get the odd blip up there, you might get the odd blip down here, but that's going to have very little tally, numbers, contracts, volume. Whereas here, you're going to get tons, like you got here at 150. Tons, very little here. What's that doing? Forming a distribution in this shape. And what it is they've just noticed, mathematicians, that any sort of sample or population that has outcomes that tend to congregate around a central value, and there's loads of things I'm going to show you. Well, what they've noticed is mathematically within one standard deviation, which is it's a measure of dispersion or sort of how much price varies from the mean in terms of all the values. And it's going to make sense in the next slide. We can standardize that and say across all of these financial markets, milk, bread, heights of children, shoe sizes, whatever, within a one standard deviation range either side, 68, 34 plus 34, 68%, i.e. the majority of values will fall within that range. So can you see why I talked about that 70% now? Okay, even market professionals just say, do you know what, let's just round it up to 70%, because they've recognized the market's imperfect. Let's just use that sort of standard deviation range as 70 rather than 68. But what I want to do is, so understand that may still not have been clear to a lot of people. To some of you who've looked at normal distribution, it would have. Why don't we go and see how normal distribution works in real life? Again, I'm not saying this because for an ego reason, but I want you to know that you will not see this in a proprietary trading environment, in a professional trading environment. They're not going to teach you this. I'm doing this because I really feel strongly that I want to bridge the gap. I've promised to bridge the gap between retail and professional, and I want to do that. But I want to do more. I want to do more than that, and I want to show you some of the pitfalls that people can fall into. Because this isn't explained to them properly, But B, even if they come from a background where they know this inside out, they go to the other extreme where they try to be too precise with all of this. Just get the gist of it and you're going to be laughing. And, don't worry too much about all of this. You don't need to know. All this is telling us is why within one standard deviation is 34.1 and 34.0. Honestly, who cares? Like I said, I used to be obsessed and I used to feel so good about myself that, I know all of this. And when it came to trading the markets, oh my God, I wasn't a disaster, but as I said, I did stagnate, and there were guys around me doing so much better who didn't have this mathematical background and used to drive me bananas. And then I realized why. It's because they were much more flexible, right? They accepted it. I found that hard to accept, that markets are imprecise. So, get all this stuff out of your head. Don't worry about it. It's really not going to do you any favors. Get the gist of it. Let's go on to the next slide and look at it in a real world example. Cheers. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so just to reiterate the point, what I've done here is I've put together a quick summary of some of the things that we've talked about and, what you need to come away with and why it's actually really not that complicated. But the reason I talk about it in depth is because I like to do a good job and just make sure that I've covered all the bases. And I said it before, it's better I say more and do some people's heads in by talking so much rather than not say enough and leave people confused. So, I'd rather say too much than too little. So essentially that's why I'm going over this in so much detail, even though, as you'll notice, as we progress into developing strategy, a lot of this, it's really not going to be that important. Like I said, as long as you just kind of understand that. Do you know what? Approximately the majority of the values, 70%, is what is considered the value area, is fair value. But what it is I really would like to show you why that is and why it is that institutions are using a normal distribution or this type of analysis and this sort of equidistant on each side with a central location. So what it is volume profile. I've already talked about this before. Don't get confused by this and think it's beyond you. It really is not. It's so basic. All it is people are collecting data, right? And they're basically putting the data into certain buckets on axes. So here it could be price, right? For example, it could be height, could be IQ, people's IQs, it could be the weight of babies, it could be the shoe sizes, obviously it could be the price, if it's pound, dollar, bread, as you saw in the example I talked about before. Guys, it could be anything. And then here you're simply looking at the frequency, okay? And basically what you're doing is you're just collecting a histogram of data where you're simply saying, so let's just go through these very quickly. You could be saying, do you know what? Majority of height of, males is 180 centimeters. So the majority of them is going to be here. And then actually there might be some that are 170, there might be some that are 190. Then there's going to be very few that are, either side. And it's going to follow this. See, what it is, if you think about it, how many things in life have this central tendency? We talked about it. Pretty much everything on the supermarket shelf, right? A can of sort of Coke Zero, look, I don't know how much it is in the States, but obviously I'm from the UK. It's about 60p these days. Guys, you go to Tesco, you go to a corner shop, you go here, you go there. It's really not going to vary by that much. Go and do it. Go and do this experiment. Go and build a probability distribution, a histogram, and just go and write it down. 60p, 61p, 62, 63, 64, all the way up to £2 maybe, and then 0 here. It's going to have what? A central tendency. Are you to agree? Let's say you go to 1,000 stores throughout the country. Let's be honest. Almost 90% of them are going to be somewhere in this region, right? I agree, some might be 65p, some might be 55p, some odd ones might be 50p, right? So you're going to have this. Can you see where we're going with this? And each one of these is no different to a market order. Just collecting market orders, that's all you're doing. In the same way the exchange is collecting this data, do you see it's almost like this exchange is doing a survey and looking at market orders that are taking place in the marketplace. Instead of Diet Coke, it's just futures. And they're just recording it and they're building up this sort of histogram. And they're just saying, do you know what? Let's just see. What sort of shape does it take? And it has a central tendency, these Cokes. Guys, hardly anyone's going to be lucky enough to... You might get the odd person where it's near expiry or something. Or whatever. There's some stock issues or whatever, I don't know, a huge surplus, and they might get it for 5p, 10p, but let's be honest. Not going to be anywhere near the amount that get it for 60p, right? So it's going to be this central tendency, right? And then equally, hardly anyone's going to charge £2 for a can of Diet Coke or whatever it is that we're looking at. Central tendency, can you see? You've got to realise it's a phenomena that takes place in most things in life. People's IQ levels will follow the same sort of distribution. Babies' weights, they're not going to vary by a mammoth amount. They're going to be approximately the same. Shoe sizes for certain ages, all men that are 35, go out there, ask them their shoe sizes. You're going to find over thousands and thousands and thousands, which we have here, thousands of market orders. They're going to all be around, obviously I only know UK shoe sizes, but say 8, 9, 10, 11, that sort of region. Who's going to be out there with a shoe size of 1? Hardly anyone. They all tend to congregate around a central value, right? Guys, there's so many examples that I could show you. So what governments are doing, hospitals or clinicians, I can't think of the word, but the people doing these clinical trials and obviously trying to figure things out, what they've realized is that they can use this as a sampling method. And if for example the government's trying to work out what's the average height of people, look, it's not practical to send a questionnaire out to 6 million people or 10 million people or how many people live in the country. They'll do a sample and they'll just be trying to figure out what's the probability that the majority fit within a 1 standard deviation range. And we're going to calculate the standard deviation in a moment. And that's all we're doing. Can of Coke, what's the probability that the majority fit within this range? How can I compare this to birth weight, to shoe size, to pound dollar? Because have you noticed, guys, you don't need to take my word for it. That's the beautiful thing about this. Look at what prices of financial instruments are doing. It's human behavior. Humans love doing things that are habitual, where they feel comfortable. What did we talk about before on eBay, where we said, not Can of Coke, the iPhone, right? If it's trading at £1,000 and people can see that previous transactions have taken place at about £1,000, I put 1k here. Do you agree the majority of transactions are going to take place there? Why is that? We're going to feel uncomfortable going to 2,000 because hang on a minute, everyone's trading at 1,000. I want to do what everyone else does. Can you see that? It's going to be this central tendency. You're going to get the odd lucky guy, it happens, who just happens to catch someone off guard and they get it, for like £500-600, very rare. And then you might get the odd guy who has this sort of desperation, I need it tomorrow, it's my wife's birthday, I'm just going to pay £1,200, £1,300, because that's all that's available, right? So you get the odd few people, but the majority are going to take place where? The central value of £1,000. And look, same shape. Guys, it's the beauty of this, the way that you can see why I look at the markets this way. Because you've seen, guys, I'm a very scientific person. I need proof, right? This is why I hate indicators, because as soon as I look at the proof, it's easy. I can see the garbage. When I look at this, I find it very hard to dismiss this, because I'm like, hang on a minute. The market, I don't even need to take anyone's word for it. Look, I'm actually looking at it myself. You tell me, what shape is this? The majority of transactions are taking place around certain values. And we see that all the time. We see markets get happy, and they do what? They do this. Okay, they settle around this central value. Okay, the majority of transactions are taking place. So I know that's taken a while for me to explain, but it's really important that you understand, because what's happened historically is, to help solve this problem of, how can we make forecasts and predictions about the likely height of the entire population, the IQ, the birth weights, shoe sizes, all these sort of things, clinical trials as well. Mathematicians historically realized that, if something has central tendency, as we've seen, so many things do, financial markets seem to have this central tendency. What they've realized is there's this measure called standard deviation, and all that is it's looking at how spread out the values are. There's this measurement that when you actually use a certain measurement, and we're going to do it together in a second, that no matter what you're looking at, height, IQ, birth weight, male shoe size, pound, dollar, financial transactions, as long as they follow this shape of distribution of values, then 68% will fall within the exact same range when measured in standard deviation terms. Okay, so that is where this 68% comes from, or 70%. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. That's why we look at standard deviation, and basically that is the value area. So it's called, that will be this standard deviation here, and it's basically it's called the value area high. Okay, so the standard deviation there, which you see here, and then you see here where 68%, 34 plus 34, we just round it up to 70, is we just say, look, do you know what? Where, by calculating the standard deviation, and the machine will do this for you, Sierra Chart does it automatically, don't worry, you don't need to do it. This is why I say don't worry too much about this stuff. I just like to explain it to you, because I want you to go home comfortable, not thinking, Envy's just taking it. No, never take my word for things. So I want to explain this to you. So if you decided to kind of work this out for yourself, I've given you an example here. There's probably tons of examples for basic standard deviation calculations on the internet, but I want this to be the best course on the market, so that's why I'm doing this, because I want to actually derive this to some extent myself. And obviously we're not going to do the maths on the previous slide. It's irrelevant, we'll be here all day trying to do that. This is good enough to show you what a standard deviation is. So basically it's called a value area high and a value area low. For obvious reasons, that's the high of the value area and that's the low of the value area, and it's just these standard deviations, and it's basically where 70% of the data fall. And then you've got the mode, and all the mode is, right? So what happens is, if you think about it, in any statistical data set or any data set, let's say you're the government, right? And you say to a worker, let's say you work for the government, and all these are descriptive statistics, which, I don't know, maybe it doesn't sound complicated to you, maybe it does to some of you, isn't it? It's really basic. All it means is, let's say you work for the government say, look, can you go and find out the height of certain age of the population, male population, or shoe size or whatever, and let us know. And imagine they did say to you, go and find out from every single person, so it could be several million, it might take you some time, whatever. So you come back with this huge database of values, right? Is it really going to help the government if you say, here you go, here's 6 million values, or even if you took a sample of 100 people, 300 people, and said, here's 300 values? It's going to be meaningless. You need some way of describing that data, and all that's the average. Okay, so the average is a descriptive statistic. So in its most simplistic format, it could be like, you've got 3 numbers, 1, 2, 3. What's the average? It's 2. 2 describes, basically, it's the average. It describes these numbers in one number. You're just looking at the average, saying, do you know what? Roughly, it's 2, basically. If someone said to you, these 3 data points meant something, and I want you to describe them in one number, you're going to go for the average, aren't you? You're going to say, look, it's approximately 2. And all the standard deviation is doing, and we're going to come back to this, is looking at the spread. Because what it is let's take another example. If you, for example, were to look at, let's say you had three numbers, right? 4, 5, and 6. What's the average? 5, right? Pretty straightforward. Okay? These are quite evenly spread out. But then, what if you had different numbers? So let's, and again, look, I told you I don't script in this. I'm just making this up, but so it could be a disaster, but let's hope not. Let's say you had 2, 5, and 8, right? What's the average? It's the same, isn't it? It's 5, 3 either side. But if I tell you in one number a descriptive statistic of these three numbers as being 5, and same here, it's 5, you say to me, I can only tell you one number. Because think about it, this could be loads of values, right? It could be loads of values either side. Obviously, I don't want to give you all the data. I want to describe it as an average. On average, it's almost like, if you think about it, you see it all the time in sport, don't you? Where football teams, soccer teams, obviously in the US it's called soccer, over here it's football or hockey or whatever. I'm going to talk in football terms or cricket terms. Actually, let's use cricket. A team scores over a season, they might play 50 matches and they might score 200 over, say 50 overs. 200, 300, 100, 150, 200, 300. This list could go on for 50 matches. How many times do you say, on average they scored 180? Do you see it's used all the time, isn't it? It's a descriptive statistic. That's all the mean is. But the point is that, look here, does it tell me that the other values are much closer in this scenario to this scenario? Can you see 4, 5, 6 are very bunched up? No, 2, 5, and 8 spread out. But the mean's the same, right? So you need some descriptive statistic that tells you the deviation. It's called, to deviate is to deviate. How much does it move? So the standard deviation is just a measure of how spread out values are. Obviously, the standard deviation is going to be bigger here because it's more spread out. Here, the standard deviation is going to be smaller. So basically, what it's saying is that 68% of values in one standard deviation in this set of numbers is going to be in a smaller range, whereas here it's going to be in a wider range. Very basic. And just to hammer home this point, we're now going to do a real example where we look at this. But just to sort of, for completion's sake, I said I want, as long as you come away from this being comfortable that, alright, as long as 70% of the values fit in here, there's a couple of other things you just need to know, and that really, honestly, they're very straightforward, is that this is something called the VPOC, which is the mode. So the mode is the most common value in a series of data points. And honestly, the mode and the mean have different advantages and disadvantages. When you're using VWAP, which is basically the mean, all it is it's literally just the average, but it's weighted by volume. I'm going to show you that a bit later. We don't really look at it in volume profile. And look, I'm not going to go into, otherwise we're going to end up having a statistics course, right? It's irrelevant. Honestly, you can be, like I said, you can go down the rabbit hole with mathematics and you're just going to lose sight of what you're actually trying to achieve here. We're trying to sort of figure out where you've got bigger problems to worry about. As I said, there's different values across different time horizons and you've got much bigger things to worry about than how precise you are with here. So look, if a lot of this is going over your head, honestly, don't worry about it. Keep going over this a few times and I promise you will get it. If you don't, let me know, obviously, but you'll see that it really is not important to be precise. However, I'm just going to tell you again for completion's sake that on a volume profile, and it will become obvious to you why we want to look at the most common value here, because think about it, like I said with the iPhone example and so on and so forth, we want to know where did the most transactions take place, and that is, it's called the volume point of control, because in theory it should have the most control over price, because price should always want to reach there, right? Because like in an eBay auction, the price always wants to go to where previous transactions have taken place the most. So that's why we look at that as the mode, which is just the most frequently occurring. That's all it is, honestly. Don't overcomplicate it. It's nothing more than that. It's just, and the system will do this for you. Just literally on your volume profile where you saw those individual contract numbers, it's just where the most contracts took place at a price point, and it's marked by a green number. And in theory, that's where the market should be very attracted to. But honestly, I tell you from years of experience, it's never going to work that way. What will happen is, this is why I tell people, you need time to learn the market, because you have to observe it and believe it for yourself. You'll notice that, if the market is out of balance, say it's down here, and we get into the value area low, and we start to test it, and then we break into it. You're thinking you want to go to balance. Guys, it's never going to be like, boom, to the point, yeah, brilliant. Crystal ball, I got this. Not going to work like that. What's actually going to happen is, and again, this will come with experience, you'll notice, is that what the market will do is it will do stuff like this, come up, and it might stop there, then come off, and then it might get closer, and then come off, and then it might overshoot, and then come off. Can you see what's happening? It's approximate. Be very roughly in this region. People find it hard to accept. I'm sorry, you're just going to have to accept it. The market will never go to this magical point. It's going to be very rough. And, this is where discretion will come in. You'll obviously be reading this, and, we'll do some of that together. But for now, just understand that that's why we use the mode as a descriptive statistic, i.e. the most common, rather than the average. Because the average doesn't make sense here. It makes sense to look at the most common value as the major focal point. That's why it's called the point of control. But with a VWAP, and we're going to do a whole section on VWAP, it makes more sense for us to look at the average as a sort of descriptive statistic, because what's happening with the VWAP is it's a volume weighted average price, and essentially it's developing throughout the day. It's a much more accurate measure of what the sort of average price achieved by the market is throughout the day. And let's leave it there, because otherwise we're going to end up going way off topic, and we are going to come back to the VWAP. But just understand that in the following example, when we calculate the mean, which everyone has done, the average is the thing that I refer to as the VWAP. And when we're working out the mode, it's basically the VPOC, which is there, and then standard deviation is essentially just how distributed these values are. Because if you think about it, if a distribution is very much more, here the values are quite scrunched up, but if you get, for example, let's look at this. And apologies, we are just about to move on to the next stage, but obviously I needed to go through all of these. Would you agree that here, look, it's obvious, right? Can you see the standard deviation here? The range is going to be smaller, isn't it, than this? Okay? Because the values are more spread out. So I don't mean in absolute terms, I mean in sort of number of points range. Do you see what I mean? So let's say this was, I don't know, pound dollar. This is 100 pips. That's going to be more like 20 to 30 pips or whatever. I'm just making up these numbers, but you see my point. And they're still one standard deviation apart. So they're actually telling us the same thing. 70% of the data, but it's just more spread out. That's why we use this standard definition. Because if we didn't, it'd be very difficult for us to compare this to this. We just wouldn't be able to compare them. That's why we use the normal distribution, because it has this mathematical property. When you square the variances and then you do the square root of the average of those, which we're going to do in a second together, you can compare them on a standardized basis. So let's go on and do that, and then we're going to pretty much end up finishing off the chapter. So I'll see you on the next slide. Okay, traders, so we're going to quickly, or as quickly as possible, look at a real life example, and we're just going to try and understand how do we actually calculate mean, mode and standard deviation. And for completion, there is this thing called a median. You may have heard of it. Again, it's well over exaggerated how complicated it is. It's really not. It's just a middle value. We don't really use it. It's meaningless. The middle value doesn't tell us anything because it doesn't take into account what the amount of volume that's taken place. The median is a little bit like using technical analysis. It's very sort of linear weighted. There's no weighting given. And I talked about this in one of the previous sections, towards the end, where I said there were 9,999 transactions taking place at one price. I can't remember. It's almost like you're ignoring all of that. So we don't want to do that. We do actually want to do what? We want to acknowledge that at this price 1, there's that many transactions, and at price 2, say this one, there was that many transactions, right? Obviously it's ludicrous for us just to not take that into account. Whereas obviously the mode and the mean takes volume at each level into account, in the sense that mode, we already know, it's just the most frequently occurring. And then we're going to look at standard deviation, as I said, which gives us some sort of standard measure of how spread out the values are. And we can compare that equally across the same types of distribution. So let's crack on and look at, so I've got this data off the internet. Someone did a survey already where they took the height of 30-year-old males. It's not a big sample, but look, at the end of the day, to prove the point, we don't want to be here with 1,000 data points. We're really not going to achieve much. We're going to be able to achieve the same thing just by looking at 30 data points. And I highly recommend you do this yourself. Go and find, if you want. Is it going to help you become a better trader? Probably not, as if I'm honest with you. Like I said, those of you without the mathematical background are probably better off, because you're going to not take this stuff in the precise way. Luckily, I've managed to detach myself many years ago from it. But obviously, if you don't face the issue, you don't have to overcome it in the first place. You're okay. If you can get this, you're fine. But, if you want and you've got some time on your hands, do it. By all means, nothing wrong with it. And prove to yourself that so many things out there have a central tendency. So what do I mean by that? Again, I've said it a few times, but so what this chap did on the internet is he asked 30 people, random males, what's the height? And this were the results. So basically, what I did is I just plotted it myself in Excel. I can show you how to do this. If you see my coronavirus analysis that I did on Instagram, which is really, really strong analysis, where I looked at the range. And do you remember the range of the market? It had what? A central tendency. It's really unbelievable how this sort of bell-shaped distribution is everywhere in life. And by the way, I can't help myself but have a knock at technical analysis, and I'm going to, but I back it up. And I know people will say, why is bashing it so much? But I back it up. Fibonacci, people use Fibonacci. It's just, honestly, it boggles my mind. Because do you know that how Fibonacci numbers were created? It was to solve this problem of trying to predict the exponential growth rate in the rabbit population, okay? Guys, it's just nonsense. People are using mathematics that was observable in the reproductive rate of rabbits and trying to apply it to financial markets. It's complete nonsense, okay? If you actually even took 2-3 minutes to look at it properly, you'd see that. That's why I'm doing this, because it's important. We prove it to ourselves, and all you need to do is observe. What's the actual market doing? Is it following the same rate of reproductive production of rabbits? I mean, rubbish. I'm not saying that Fibonacci golden ratios and whatever don't appear in nature. They do. But financial market's not nature. It's not, it's not nature, guys. One of the reasons why we've got this coronavirus issue going on is because we're doing things that don't conform to nature, right? We're human beings, we're emotional, we do all these irrational things. And normal distribution takes that into account in the sense that, yeah, there is a central tendency, but you get these odd occasions where we go out, we have these emotional periods, and it, you know, and those periods are less than the ones that are in the bulk. Okay, so normal distribution, you can just observe it. It follows that pattern. Okay, so you've got to be very careful. This is what I mean. When someone tells you use Fibonacci, use this, use that, stop for a moment and actually think that, you know, what is that mathematics based on? So it's useful for its purpose, but no, you know, normal distribution and the balancing type of tendency. That, think of the word balance. What does it mean? Central tendency. The tendency of markets is very, very closely aligned to normal distributions and proofs in the pudding. Every single financial institution in the world is using normal distribution to look at measures of description of their data, their profits, their you know, obviously financial market analysis, and so on and so forth. Look, don't get me wrong, there's no model in the world that's 100% perfect, and I know I've gone a little bit off topic here, but I haven't. It's important you understand this, that at the end of the day, in an ideal world, transactions would have taken place here, 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 here. Do you see what I mean? And it would be very smooth, as we saw in here, right? This area here. But it's not. But that's as close as you're going to get. Look how close it is. This is what the problem was with me being a mathematician. Is I found it hard to accept. No, it has to be exactly the perfect this, that, and that. You know, I've come to terms with that many years ago because I realised it was holding me back. So, and I'm, you know, I hope you don't mind me constantly saying this point. It's because I do want to put at ease a lot of people who think, and I know there's this perception that, oh, people in institutional environments are all these clever whiz kids, and that's what the differentiating factor. Honestly, is not. Because can you see, you're never going to find the perfect model, and people from those backgrounds, including myself, causes big problems when you try to be very, very precise. Just get the gist of it, which I'm going to show you now, but at least understand why we're even looking at it, and institutions are looking at this and not Fibonacci, because the maths make sense. We see it everywhere. Everything has a central tendency, not everything, but many things. But financial markets do. They've shown it to us time and time again. And we've got this wonderful thing called a standard deviation, which has these beautiful mathematical properties where we can compare everything that has the same shape and say within 2 standard deviation range, 70% of values are going to fall. 70% is approximately the majority. 2 standard deviations, 95% of values are going to fall. So, let's crack on with this example. So with these heights, right, I plotted them myself. So this is a table I made myself in Excel. Like I said, if you want me to help you to do this, I can, but obviously I've done this in the intro. As you can see, I like talk a lot, so there's no time to obviously do the Excel example with you. And can you see? Central tendency, guys. The majority of males that are 30 are, you know, round about 179, 180. It makes sense, you know, in the high 5 feet stroke 6 foot range. Can you see we've got the same problem though? We need to figure out kind of where's the value area? Where's the majority of data? Where is the range within which 70% of males in the entire country are likely to fall? How can we do that? Standard deviation. All right, so how do we calculate standard deviation? And the mean, right? We want to know like this rough number on average. I talked about the cricket scores. On average, where are they? And that's what we're going to do now. So we're going to work out the mean, mode, standard deviation. Mean is the VWAP. Mode is the VPOC, right? And the standard deviation is the standard deviation, okay? Or the value area, I beg your pardon. Value area, okay? So let's just remind ourselves. Value area VPOC. VWAP will be somewhat in here, but we don't use it on volume profile. We actually use it as a line, and obviously don't get too worried about it. We're going to do a whole section on the VWAP, but let's actually go and calculate these values. Okay, so here we are. I've put all the data together nicely, and I know my head covers this, but really I didn't want to get rid of this, so just please excuse me for one moment whilst my head covers this table. But essentially, don't worry about it. It's exactly the same table that you saw here. Okay, it's just basically here. It's the same table, and obviously you can see the distribution is exactly the same. Okay, and so all I've done is basically I've worked out the mean, the average. You know, it's like, honestly, it's like taking two numbers, 1 and 2, and saying, what's the mean? It's average. It's 1.5, isn't it? It's that simple. What we're doing though, when you have volume weighted average price, because I don't really want to cover this in the VWAP section, that's why I've mentioned it here. I do want to cover it here. What we're actually doing is, honestly, it's very simple. What you see, what a simple average does is, and this is the problem with technical analysis, as I said to you previously, where you had, I think in one of the sections where I showed, was it pound dollar? I think 150, 135, 120 maybe. I can't remember exactly. And I said there were 9,999 here, or it may have been down here. I can't remember. But basically, in fact, I think it was near the bottom, wasn't it? I said that there were bulk of transactions here, and there was very little up here. It's like just saying, well, it's 150 and 120, and let's just take the average of 150 over 120, and obviously you're going to get, what, 135? It's nonsense, isn't it? Every transaction took place at 120. So what you really need to do is you need to write down 120 plus 120 plus 120 plus 120, 9,999 times, plus 150, and then divide it by 10,000. And your number's going to be like 1.2000, and a very small number, close to 120. It's weighted by volume. And guys, you've got to understand, that's the right way to do it. Why do I say that? Let me prove it to you. So would you agree? This is the distribution of heights. Can you see 180 centimeters there, which was obviously that central value? Look, 180, 180, 180, 180, 180. The way that technical analysis will do it is it will just say, oh, the average is 180 plus, so just do 174 plus 175 plus 176 plus 170 plus these, etc., etc. It will come up to 180. We'll just say plus 180 plus 181 plus 182. Pretty garbage, right? At the end of the day, we can see 180's happen 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Do you see what I mean? There's been more than one occurrence of it. What happens in financial markets, right? If you've got the price and the market is moving, do you get one occurrence at this price? No, of course not. You get loads of occurrences. Do you remember? You get lots of market orders. Can you see how ludicrous it is what's happening with technical analysis? It's basically ignoring this. It's ignoring this and just saying, nope, every value took place once. Let's just take the simple mean. No, you're taking into account that there were more at 180 and there was less at 185. It's a fair way to do it, right? Even exponential, you see some of these moves, complete garbage. Why is that? Because applying more weighting to the front numbers rather. What does that mean? That doesn't mean anything. What does that mean? Does that, there would be more transactions taking place more recently than before? Completely ludicrous when you actually think about it. And sorry, I know I get animated. It's because it's important to me. I want people to start to see how misled they've been, and it really cheeses me off that the industry is making a fool of us. That's what it's doing, right? It's making a fool of us. I mean, come on, this stuff is the correct way to do it. We have to take into account the number of occurrences, and that's all I've done, okay? So what the volume weighted average price is doing is it will just say, all right, 180 times 6 plus 181 times 3 plus 182 times 2. Do you see what I mean? It's just taking into account, or you can write them all down, but 100,000 contracts in a day at different market orders at all different prices. You can, if you want, write down 100,000 different prices. And do you know what? I've actually done this. Not 100,000, but you may have noticed there's a CME reset period where the volume profile resets at the start of the day. I hate taking people's word for it. So I've actually done this a few times. Many years ago I calculated it myself. When it had gone to like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and there were a few hundred manageable, I took the depth of market and I actually wrote down every single price and every single number of contracts, and I divided it by the number to prove to myself that VWAP, all it's doing is, instead of this being heights of adults, is the market price. And then I looked at the occurrences. What is this? Do you remember on your volume profile, you used to have that number where it would tell you 10,826 contracts? And what do you think this is? It's the same thing, guys. 10,826 contracts. Do you remember what I mean? This thing. Look. This is a frequency distribution. That is what this is. It's amazing, isn't it? It's exactly the same thing. Okay? It's identical. That's all we're doing. Is we're just taking the weighted average, and that's all the VWAP is, okay? So obviously I'm not going to sit here and I'm not going to add all these up and divide by 30, but you can do it if you want. It's basically 179.4. So can you see basically that the mean is slightly different to the mode? The VPOC is 180. Can you see that? It's 180. And what you'll find is, and look, I don't want to get too, because again, it's not really relevant, but, you know, obviously I'm quite familiar with this because I studied statistics to a very high level, but you don't need to. Honestly, you don't need to even know what I'm about to tell you. You can probably do a bit of Googling if you want in your spare time. Again, I'm not here to give anyone a statistics class because I really don't think it's relevant. But if this is slightly skewed to this side, there will be differences between obviously the most commonly occurring and the mean, because obviously the mean is going to be skewed by more occurrences taking place on one side than the other. There will be, slight differences between the mode and I think that's my body trying to tell me that I've probably been talking way too much, and I'm probably sending everyone off into non-concentration zone now. So I'll try and be as quick as possible. But yeah, essentially that is the VWAP, is the weighted average. Obviously here with heights is nice because if your government, like I said, says to you, look, go and find out the approximate heights of 30-year-olds, you can say to them, do you know what? It's about 179.4, right? You could say to them it's 180. In this particular circumstance, maybe a better measure is the weighted average. But like I said, in volume profile, for the reasons mentioned in the previous page, the market technicians anyway, not technicians, but market profilers or volume profile technicians do like to, and banks and institutions, they do like to look at the VPOC because at the end of the day, that's where the most transactions took place. So it makes more sense from a financial markets perspective, but there's no right or wrong answer. And like I said, as long as you're roughly in the ballpark, that's okay. And then we look at the standard deviation, okay? So I'm not actually going to sit here and do the calculation with you, but if you get a chance, I highly recommend you do it. What basically the standard deviation does is, honestly, it's not complicated. It's a measure of deviation. How much does something deviate from what? This central value, the mean, okay? So we already said that the mean was what? 179.4. Do you remember the previous example where I gave you with, I think, 5, 8 and 2 and 5, 6 and 4? And obviously the 5, 6, 4 had a very small spread. How do we measure this? Well, all we're doing is, like, and honestly, I can't remember exactly, but forgive me if I got this slightly wrong, but I think this was it, 5, 8 and 2. Can you see, the mean is 5 here. Would you agree? Can you see it varies by 1 here? This varies by 3. This varies by 1. It's more spread out. This is more spread out, right? The problem is, right, and I don't know if you've ever done any sort of basic statistics before. Again, if you haven't, please don't think I'm saying you need to. Honestly, don't worry about it. You can get yourself up to speed pretty quickly. And if you want to, it's really not that difficult. I'd highly suggest you try it. Is what you can do is you can say, look, in this example, either side it's 1. The difference between the mean, 4, 5, and 6, is 5. And how much do the 3 values deviate from the average? 5, whether it's 1 either side. You see the problem with doing that when you're doing this for values, because we see it here, right? We can say, okay, in the first observation, it was 185. Can you see it was quite a fair distance? It was quite a fair distance. So that was a small distance. Observation 4 was this. So you're just comparing each in the same way you're comparing 4 to 5 and 6 to 5. It's just more values, that's all. You're just comparing this. How much does it deviate from my average value? Because in an ideal world, everything would be here. But it's not, is it? We know financial markets do what? This. Can you see what they're doing? Exactly what heights are doing. They tend to vary a little bit. And you'll see here, if you had a distribution which is this, how does it look like that? It's the same thing, guys. Amazing, isn't it? The height of 30-year-old males follows a balancing financial market. Okay? And I've shown it to you, I've proved it to you, and you can prove it to yourself quite easily. But you want to look at how dispersed are these. So coming back to this example, see, part of the problem is, if you look at the mean right here, if you do 6 minus 5, what do you get? 1. If you do 4 minus 5, what do you get? Minus 1. What's minus 1 plus 1? 0. What you'll find is, if you can do this for yourself, I highly recommend it. Do 185 minus 179.4. 177, which is what all you're doing is, that's 185 minus 179.4. You're comparing the distance there, distance here. If you added all these distances up, it's going to equal 0, okay? Because they're all equidistant, aren't they? They're all equidistant in terms of, that's the whole point of the average. And if you look here, what's the difference here? 8 minus 5 is 3. And you could say, yeah, but that's more than 1. But hang on a minute, what about 2? 2 minus 5 is minus 3. What's minus 3 plus 3? 0. Can you see? You can't compare 0 and 0. It doesn't make sense. So to overcome this, what mathematicians have done is they square these values. And I'm not going to do this for every single one, but essentially what they do is they just multiply the number by each other. So if you're not familiar with it, all you're doing is just saying 1 times 1 is 1, and minus 1 times minus 1 is 1. So it actually becomes a positive number when you add them up. I'm not going to do it for every single one, but essentially what you're doing is you're just squaring each one of these deviations, right? How much does the actual deviate from the mean? That's why it's called the standard deviation. And actually what mathematicians found is, if they take the square root of that, it fits perfectly into a distribution where that number that you get when you square root it is called a standard deviation, and it encompasses 68%. Why? Well, that's why. It's pointless. We don't need to get into all of this. There is a mathematical reason why. When you take the square of every variance and do the square root of it, you come up with this number called the standard deviation. It's a standard deviation, and every single distribution that follows, a frequency distribution that follows this sort of normal distribution shape, that standard deviation value, 68% of all your values will always fall within a standard deviation either side. Okay, so let me bring this to life for you. So what I did is, I did the square, right? So I did 185 minus 179.4, 177 minus 179.4, 180 minus blah, blah, blah. If you do the sum of all of these 30 numbers, you're going to get 0. So I squared them, and then I took the square root, okay? And what I came up with was, where is it? So I took the average variation, which I talked about already, and then what did I do? We somehow square them. So I took the square root, okay, and the standard deviation was 2.6. So guys, let me bring this to life for you. All it's saying is the standard deviation, right? The average deviation is 2.6 centimeters. So what it's doing is it's saying this value here, okay, that's the symbol for standard deviation, is just saying that is 2.6 centimeters. So what does that mean? Did you remember it said 1 standard deviation? All it's saying is if I add 2.62, the mean, 79.4, which is what, 182. So can you see that? 182. And look, I drew it by hand and I almost got the answer. This is why I say, please don't get bogged down in maths. Honestly, you're just doing yourself no favours. I pretty much got it by eye, okay? But I just wanted to show you that this is what institutions are doing, because they get a machine to be a little bit more precise and draw this on for them. And then what you do is, so 1 standard deviation is 2.6 centimeters that way, and we just do the same the other side. So we do 179.4 minus 2 is 177.4, and then you got 176.8, isn't it? So 176.8, and that is, so I was almost right, it's somewhere in that region there. So I wasn't that far off. Okay, so all this is telling us is there's a 70% chance, okay, that male heights will fall between just below 177 and obviously 182. Okay. Now I know some guy who's watching this probably done statistics to a very high level and say, hang on, you should have done n-1 because it's a sample and it's not the whole population. I don't want to get into all of that. I recognise that, okay, but listen, we're not, we're trading human emotions here, as we've seen. Doesn't matter. I just want to acknowledge that as a side note to anyone who's done statistics. I know they're going to think that, and look, I'm aware of that, okay, but let's not get into that, because honestly it just won't, it's irrelevant, and it doesn't really matter. The point is that in financial markets, when we're looking at value areas, especially in a historical basis, we are looking at the whole population, because we're basically looking at every single market order that has taken place, okay? So what's happening basically is all the market is doing, and in fact I'll come back to this in 1 second, because we're almost done now, is I want to show you something on the next slide that the standard deviation is incredibly useful for the following reason. So let's just go to the next slide. Okay, so what I've done here is, and honestly, don't get too worried about thinking, oh my god, what's going on here? Honestly, it is very, very simple. All I've done is I've taken this, I've scrunched it up a little bit, and I've taken this data. So the data you see here and this is basically this. Okay, do you remember where it was 180 and this is what we've just been looking at. I've just basically scaled it so I can compare it to the exact same experiment done where the values were much more spread out. Can you see here, would you agree, compared to the mean, look, it's almost like a financial market that was balancing in a very small range. Okay? That's what we've just been looking at, male heights. Now imagine you had a market that was much more spread out. It transacted at much wider values and more frequently. Can you see you're going to have a wider range? Right? This is wider than that, isn't it? Right? We said what? The standard deviation was 2.6 centimeters. Do you remember in the previous example that we've just been looking at? Just rewind it if you don't remember. And therefore, what did we say? We said it was about 182, didn't we? Do you remember that? I just did that 179.4 plus 2.6, and obviously this was just below 178. Right, so one standard deviation, one standard deviation. Would you agree that the standard deviation, therefore, you don't even need to know what standard deviation is? Any measure of spread. Look at this. Would you agree? This is more spread out than this, right? It's very thin. Obviously, the measure of spread has to be bigger. Well, look. When I did the same calculation, guys, I can send you this data. We can do it together if you want. If you're really interested, I'm more than happy to do that with someone where you can work this out for yourself. I can send you the data. And in fact, this is the data for I believe this is the data for the more spread out. No, it isn't. It isn't. I don't have it here, but I can send it to you if you want. All I've done is I've just used slightly more spread out data. Look what happened. I worked out the standard deviation. It's almost double. Do you see that? So 5.1, then can you see the mean is almost identical? Do you remember in that example where I had 5 and then we had 2 and we had 8 and then I had 5 and then we had 4 and 6. Well, hang on, the mean's the same. Someone says, what's the average? Right? It's like in the cricket example, if a team has 3 matches and they score 200 runs, they score 300 runs and they score 100 runs, you can say on average they scored 200. But what if another team scored 150 runs, 200 runs and 250 runs? It's still 200. But you see, it was less spread out. The volatility, the variability was a lot less in the second example. That's what we're measuring here. And can you see? By comparing the variability, the deviations in the way that I showed in the previous example, with this data set, I got a standard deviation of 5.1. What does that mean? All we're doing is we just add one standard deviation this way, and we add one standard deviation this way, and you get 5.1 from the mean of, let's just round it up and say, it's about 180. If you add 5, what are you getting? About 185 as the value area high. And 180 minus 5 is what? It's about 175. It's there. And look here. Can you see? This is your value area for this data. And look how thin this value area is compared to that. Can you see it? Makes sense, right? Because look at this range. It's smaller and this is wider. Because of this mathematical properties, which you don't need to worry about. But can you see why they use them? Because now we can compare this to this, and I hope this finally makes sense, because I know, and I hope you can understand why to explain it in this way, slowly. All you're saying is 70% of the data, there's a 70% chance in this distribution that values will fall within basically whatever it was it about 185, right, and 175. How do we compare that? Well, we want to see where the 70%, we can say here, there's 70% probability that actually the same thing's going to happen, but this time in a smaller range. So it's about 182 and just below 178. Can you see I can compare them now? I can compare them. Do you now see what's going on here and why we use standard deviations? Because I'm going to leave that here because I want you to see these two are comparable. I can now say, hang on, that's one standard deviation. Let's get rid of this little bit of ink here. This is potentially, I haven't got it up on me, but the computer, Sierra will calculate this for you. Value area high, value area low. Value area high, value area low. Do you see I can start to compare them now? Because I can say that's 70%. That's 70%. That's the VPOC. That's the VPOC. The mean I don't care about, but the VWAP I do care. And we also care about standard deviation, and that is what the bands will be. It's just a standard deviation. But, like I said, professional firms are not going to explain this to you. I hope it was helpful that I explained this to you. If you don't get it, honestly, reach out to me. I love this stuff. I'll try and explain it to you a different way, or go on Google, have a look at basic standard deviation examples if you really want to get it. But honestly, really not going to make a difference as long as you can accept that within a standard deviation range, that's your value area, and you're going to get 68%. And then when it comes to VWAP, you'll see we also look at the second standard deviation, and that is at 95%. Because what it helps is it helps, obviously, institutions to see, are we extremes? Are we at extremes? Has the market moved to where, there's less than a 5% chance that we're going to enter this zone? So you can see, probability-wise, it's not a great bet. We're more likely, 95%, to do what? Move into sort of this region here. But not to that too far. 95% chance that we're going to actually stay within this region. So if we start to go to extremes, you see me trade this all the time, right? What do you see me do? When there's a little V profile bump, and I take it out, and then I take it return back. Why do you think I'm doing that? Value areas, okay? That's what I'm looking at. But on the volume profile, I'll be honest with you, it's got to the stage where even and I'll prove it to you, proof's in the pudding. Do you see me mark the value areas on my volume profile? No, I don't mark them. I prefer to visualize them because of this thing that I keep saying, and that is the mathematics is too precise for something that is imprecise. I don't look, as long as it's rough, it's helpful to me. I can just see it because Sierra will draw it on, and other market professionals, I know they're going to be looking at it. But can you see the problem already? That's not a perfect normal distribution, because look, ideally I want to see values in there. Here, I want to see values there, here. See, and I've accepted that. Life's not perfect. I can't say to people, oh, do me a favor, do you mind transacting here so my profile can be exact so I can draw precise value? It's not how markets work. They're imprecise, so there's got to be some sort of leeway given to these value areas. Okay, now I'm going to be upfront with you, and this is also going to give you some relief, those of you that are getting a bit too worried about the maths that I've been talking about. Guys, what I'm going to do is, right, at first I want you to look at value areas, but I'm going to be honest with you. I've recognized this problem that I faced early in my career, where I was very technical and I was a mathematician, and I used to be so obsessed with these value areas. Have you noticed I don't even have them on? I don't actually draw them on my volume profiles. I use them on market profile, and I'm going to come to that when I show you market profile, because what I'm doing is, with market profile, is I like to merge, so I can put this area into here, and can you see it rounds it out, and it helps me draw nice smooth profiles. Then I like to look at standard deviation, because in the normal distribution sense, because it forms nice smooth distributions like this. And look, I know for some of you, a lot of this, you'll be like, this is way over my head. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe all of you get it, but some of you may not. Honestly, don't worry. Keep practicing. It will come. It will come. Can't expect to get, something like this overnight. I've never seen it happen for anyone. It takes time. Take your time with it. Go back, watch it. I think, unless I'm mistaken, that's pretty much everything we've covered that I wanted to cover. I hope that was helpful. I've now shown you, let's just recap, because might as well have taken so long anyway. So what have I shown you? I've shown you that how we measure this is looking at the average deviation of every single value to the mean. I've shown you what the standard deviation is. I've shown you what the volume point of control is, and I'm sorry, but I've just realized one thing, and what it is, right, I have to say this, because technically someone could pick me up on this and they're going to be right. And unfortunately, it is going to confuse you slightly, but honestly, it is not going to make a difference. So what it is when VWAP is calculated, okay, and this will become more clear, and I'm going to go over this again when we look at VWAP and the standard deviation bands. VWAP is just a measure of what the volume weighted average price is. When you see standard deviation bands on the VWAP, what they're doing is they're doing exactly what you see here. They're calculating the average deviation and then doing the whole squaring and square rooting process to come up with one standard deviation as a sort of measure of dispersion. And that's what forms the band, right? As the market's going like this, you get these little value areas here. And obviously that's 2 standard deviations. What the volume profile does, and there's no particular reason for it, it's just the way it's been done for a very long time, is rather than looking at this mean, it's actually looking at the mode. So the most frequently occurring. So this basically. So you see the mean is 179.4, which actually isn't 180, it's more like there. What volume profile does is it will take the mode and then it will just keep going out until it spreads out 70%. We call it 68. There's actually a setting in the volume profile where you can change it, but the default is, I think it's 68. Everyone uses 70. I use 70. Like I said, you see, even I'm not being precise. It doesn't matter. So it kind of makes this next point redundant. I'm only putting this in because I know someone, and they're within their right to do so. They're going to say, hang on, MV, isn't volume profile done by calculating the average deviation from the mode, the point of control? And they'd be right. So I'm just going to put that in here, that basically what volume profile does is, and it's called volume value area, and what it's doing is it's basically going through the same process, but rather than using 179.4, it's using 180. Can you see it really is not going to make a big difference? Generally, in most balanced profile shapes, it's not going to make any difference, but technically that's what it's doing. And the VWAP is actually using the mean, the variance. Basically, how much do all the actual values vary from the mean for the VWAP, and how much do the actual values vary from the mode, okay, for the volume profile that we see. So there is a slight difference. There's no right or wrong way of doing it. That's why I'm not going to sit here and justify it. It doesn't matter, honestly, guys. You're going to realize this as your career progresses. The best traders in the world look at this and realize it for what it is. It's perfect mathematics trying to fit to a slightly imperfect market. So, if you're off slightly here and there, you're going to make no difference. You're going to be a better trader for it. That's why I actually say, and I genuinely meant it, people who've never done this before, they're actually better off. Because for me, it took me a couple of years to get it through my head that, do you know what, NV, it works pretty well in real life, but it doesn't work precisely. And this is the final thing I'm going to say, and I'm going to say it because it's true. I'm not going to hold things back from you just because we've been talking for 2 hours and I'm thinking, I'm not going to leave that piece of information out because it's taking me too long. No, I'm going to tell you because it's the truth. And this is the final point I'm going to make. The reason why I wouldn't be too concerned about, the maths is because notice this profile, right, is fairly balanced on this day. Look what's happened here. See, you've got a balance here, but you've actually got a different balance here. So what probably happened, I don't know for certain, but because I don't mark the open and close on my volume profile, but what probably happened is the market either opened here and it was in a balance, right? And then something happened, maybe data or something, and it became imbalanced, and then it balanced here. As opposed to here where it balanced. What happens is your software It's not practical for you to keep chopping and changing. Actually here, work out standard deviation here, standard, no. What your software is going to do is it's going to work, and every single institutional platform, algorithm, whatever, when they're looking at value areas, it's going to work out the value area for this entire day. Do you see the problem? It's going to work out the value area for the entire day and give you these two regions. And you see, over time, I've recognized that this is nonsense. In this type of distribution, what does that mean, this value area? It doesn't mean anything, because there's two distributions here. There's so much data missing here that didn't transact. Here we don't have that problem so much. Here we don't have that problem. Here we've got the same problem, look. Do you see what? I got rid of them, basically. I'm going to be honest with you. I've been very clear, and I've said I'll tell you what professional firms are doing, what I'm doing slightly differently. It's up to you. This is why I can't give you the answers. I can take you 95% of the way there. Can you see that? The other 5%, you need to work out what's comfortable for you. I can tell you what I'm doing, but I don't want you to do what I'm doing just because I'm doing it. I'm doing this because, to me, from years of observation, I thought, logically, that doesn't make sense to me. Why would I take a normal distribution value area for this? It doesn't look like this. Here it does. This day was balanced. What happened here? We probably opened like this, went imbalanced, and then we settled into a range. That's not the same as what, if we do that, it assumes we didn't do that. We didn't do that on this day. Do you see? That's the limitations, and that's the problem of looking at things too much from the precise mathematical lens. Guys, I'll tell you right now, trading in the vanilla sense, not the option structured products I talked about, it's an art, it's not a science. You've got to be able to look at things from a different perspective, a different angle that an algorithm can't do, and say to yourself, do you know what, I'm going to make a judgment call here, that makes sense to me here. Probably the value area is more like that, and then we've got a small one there, okay? And then here, maybe that's okay, maybe it's not, I don't know. Do you see? What the guy sitting next to me in a trading floor, in a professional environment, he might decide that's value and that's value, whereas I might decide, you know what, looks okay. And this is where we come to, where discretion sometimes has to be applied, and across different, obviously, time horizons, you can see that it can get quite complicated. So, look, we've done enough, I think, and we'll obviously revisit this again and again and again about value areas, and there'll be things that I mention to you just to hammer this home. But I hope that was really useful. You now understand what value areas are, volume point of control, and how we measure fair value. And what we're going to do is, I believe, don't quote me on this because I haven't actually built the section yet, but I think we're now going to start to obviously we're going to move away from theory, and we're going to look at either market profile or volume profile, one of the profiles, and we're going to start developing contextual levels around them that we can trade off. And we're going to really start looking at, these value areas as areas that we can actually take trades from. So, is the market balanced here, and we see some sort of trading opportunities to get back into balance, which you saw me do on the depth of market, or is the market going imbalanced? And now do you see we've defined what the value area high is? But we're leaving the value area. The market obviously won't do it in a straight line, let's be honest, we're kidding ourselves if that's what we think. It will obviously do it in a very jagged manner. It might do that, and then it might start to build some value here. And you'll see the volume profile build, which is why I had you on the depth of market, because when you see it, I've seen this on the depth of market, it's building value. Might build some value here above the day's value area, and we can start to think about taking long positions into an imbalanced trade. Or could come back in, we start to build some value below the value area high, and we start to think, let's take a mean reversion trade. Okay, so we're going to start to build some of these contextual levels, and then I'm going to really help you put together and develop some edge, which the sort of things I was shown in a professional environment. In fact, the exact same things and better. And then you can use that, obviously, as the pro course comes to the conclusion, and how you can develop trading strategies, either using what I show you and then making, obviously, the ideal thing is you'd make slight tweaks based on your observation. So yeah, look forward to the next section. I wanted to put that in so there's some good stuff to look forward to. I know this was long, but I hope you can see I needed to get this theory out of the way. It's really, really important that it was put somewhere in the course, and maybe take a little bit of a break, because there's only so much of my voice you can put up with without needing a break. So finally, I appreciate you letting me put the bit about my dog at the start as well, and I really wanted to, like I say, I didn't want that to affect the quality that I put into this section or any going forward. So if anything, I've really gone all out on this section, because I want people to really understand that I'm genuine when I say don't worry about it if you don't have a mathematical background. And I've really tried to be honest with you and say genuinely you are at an advantage as long as you can generally get what I'm saying when I talk about deviation, as in spread, average spread, obviously the mean and mode. As long as you can get that, generally the gist of it, you're much further ahead than someone like me, who used to be so pedantic about, nope, it's 34.1% standard deviation, it has to be this level, and literally the market gave my backside a kicking so many times until I got it. Alright, I'm going to have to give this thing a little bit of flex. So anyway, I've said the same things over and over again. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next section.